He stood in his designer tuxedo, champagne in hand, and pointed casually at the woman beside him. "This is Elena," he said with a careless smile. "She helps keep my mansion running. You know how it is. Good help is hard to find." The room chuckled politely. She stood there, silent, swallowing the humiliation like bitter medicine. Then the chairman walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and said 5 words that drained all color from his face. "Please welcome tonight's host, Elena." Because the maid he'd just mocked was about to take that stage, and his billion-dollar empire was about to crumble in front of everyone who mattered. Please sit back, relax, as we dive fully into this really remarkable story. Marcus Thornhill sat in his penthouse office, 47 floors above the city, staring at the embossed invitation like it was made of gold. Sterling Global Summit. Black tie. Invitation only. The cream-colored card felt heavy in his hands, weighted with possibility and prestige. This wasn't just another corporate event. This was the event. The kind of gathering where billion-dollar deals were whispered over champagne, where handshakes determined the future of entire industries, where reputations were made or destroyed in a single evening. Marcus had worked 15 years to get an invitation like this. 15 years of ruthless negotiations, calculated risks, and carefully crafted relationships. He'd built Thornhill Enterprises from a struggling tech startup operating out of a garage into a billion-dollar AI and automation empire. Forbes had called him the youngest billionaire in Silicon Valley. His face had graced magazine covers from Fortune to Time. His name opened doors that most men could only dream of standing in front of. But Sterling Global was different. Sterling Global was where the real titans played. Old money, generational wealth, the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. "Elena," he called out, his voice echoing through the marble hallway of their sprawling Los Angeles mansion. The sound bounced off imported Italian tiles and custom woodwork that had cost more than most people's houses. She appeared moments later from the home library, reading glasses perched delicately on her nose, a thick book in her hands. Her dark hair was pulled into a simple bun, and she wore a cream cashmere sweater and perfectly fitted jeans. Comfortable, unassuming, beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention but quietly commanded it anyway. There was something about Elena that had always drawn people in, an intelligence in her eyes, a calmness in her presence that made others feel heard. "Yes?" she asked softly, marking her page before looking up at him. Marcus turned his laptop toward her, grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. "Look at this. Sterling Global Summit." Chairman Aldrich himself signed the invitation. "Do you see this seal? That's hand-pressed. They only do that for inner circle invites." Elena stepped closer, her eyes scanning the elegant script. The invitation was indeed impressive. Gold embossing, architectural border details, the kind of craftsmanship that whispered exclusivity. "That's wonderful, Marcus. You've earned it." He nodded, already mentally rehearsing his entrance, calculating which conversations to initiate, which hands to shake first. "This is it, Elena. This is where I move from billionaire to legacy." The people at this summit control trillions. Trillions. Not millions. Not billions. We're talking about families who've shaped economic policy for generations. She smiled gently, recognizing the familiar excitement in his voice. "I'm happy for you." Marcus glanced at her, then back at the invitation, his expression shifting slightly. "It's couples only. Black tie. You'll come with me, obviously." Elena Glinkid, surprisid. "Me? Of course," Marcus said, though his tone shifted from excitement to something more calculated. "But listen, these people are old money. Real aristocracy. Generational wealth. The Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, those kinds of dynasties. They're particular about appearances." Elena's chest tightened. She'd heard this tone before, that careful modulation that meant Marcus was about to say something he knew would hurt, but would frame as necessary. "Particular how?" Marcus sighed, setting down his coffee mug on the mahogany desk. "Just don't try too hard, okay? Simple dress. Minimal jewelry. Let me do the talking. These people can smell desperation a mile away. They can spot new money versus old money instantly. I need to position myself correctly." Her hands tightened around the book she was holding, knuckles whitening slightly. Desperation? You know what I mean? Marcus said quickly, standing and walking to the window overlooking the city. You're brilliant, Elena. But this crowd, they judge everything. We went to school. Who your family is. Your pedigree. What clubs your grandfather belonged to. I can't have them thinking I'm married down. Elena's voice was quiet, controlled, but there was an edge to it. Married down. Marcus waved his hand dismissively, still staring out at the skyline. That's not what I meant. I just mean, look, if anyone asks, just keep it vague. Maybe say you manage domestic affairs or something. It's not a lie. You do oversee the household staff. You coordinate with the chef, the housekeepers, the groundskeepers. Elena stared at him, processing what he was actually asking. You want me to pretend I'm your housekeeper? Marcus's expression hardened, his jaw setting in that familiar way when he felt challenged. Don't be dramatic. I'm asking you to be strategic. Do you know how much scrutiny I'll be under? One wrong impression, and I'm out. These people don't give second chances. They're not like Silicon Valley, where you can fail up. This is different. Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened with something between disbelief and pain. And what impression does it give when you're ashamed of your wife? I'm not ashamed. Marcus snapped, turning from the window. I'm being practical. This is how the world works at this level, Elena. It's about optics. Once I'm in their circle, once they see what I bring to the table, everything will change. But right now, I can't afford distractions. I can't afford questions about who you are or where you came from. Elena looked down at the book in her hands, a dense academic text on international economics and sustainable development that she'd been annotating for weeks. She closed it slowly, deliberately. If that's what you need. Marcus exhaled, relief washing over his features like a man who'd just narrowly avoided disaster. Thank you. This is just business, Elena. You understand business. She nodded faintly, her voice barely above a whisper. I understand. Later that night, Elena lay awake in their king-size bed, staring at the ceiling while Marcus slept soundly beside her. The moonlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room. She could hear his steady breathing, the deep rhythm of someone unburdened by conscience or consequence. She thought about the man she'd married 5 years ago. The man who'd sat across from her in a small coffee shop in Cambridge, Massachusetts, talking passionately about ethical AI and the responsibility of wealth. The man who'd listened to her ideas about economic justice without interrupting or correcting. The man who'd held her hand during her mother's funeral and promised to always see her for who she truly was. The man who'd said, I love that you care more about impact than image. That man felt like a ghost now. In his place was someone obsessed with perception, with status, with being seen as untouchable. Someone who measured worth by net worth and judged relationships by return on investment. Elena whispered into the darkness, her words barely audible. You'll see me soon, Marcus. For who I really am. But he didn't hear. He was already dreaming of chandeliers and applause. If this story is already hitting home, don't go anywhere. What happens next will leave you speechless. But first, if you're enjoying this, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by someone who should have seen you? Let's talk about it. The week leading up to the summit was a blur of meticulous preparation. Marcus hired a personal stylist who spent 2 full days curating his look. He bought a custom Tom Ford tuxedo with hand-stitched lapels and mother-of-pearl buttons. He spent hours researching every confirmed attendee, their portfolios, their pet projects, their weaknesses, their recent wins and losses. He knew who was expanding into Asian markets, who was divesting from fossil fuels, who was looking for AI partnerships. Elena, meanwhile, was given a single instruction delivered casually over breakfast: wear the beige dress. The one from the charity dinner last year. Simple and forgettable. She didn't argue. She simply nodded and took another sip of her coffee. Marcus didn't notice the way her hand trembled slightly as she set down the cup. He was already scrolling through his phone, reading profiles, making mental notes. In the days leading up to the event, Elena spent her time, as she usually did, working quietly in the library, taking calls in her office, reading research papers late into the night. Marcus never asked what she was working on. He assumed it was home management or perhaps some volunteer work to fill her time. It never occurred to him to ask, because to ask would require seeing her as someone with a professional life separate from his own. On the night of the summit, rain clouds gathered on the horizon, but never broke, hanging heavy and threatening, turning the sky a dramatic shade of purple. The venue was the Bellamy Estate, a sprawling mansion in the hills overlooking Los Angeles. The estate had been in the Bellamy family for 4 generations, a testament to old money and older power. Valets in white gloves opened car doors. Photographers lined the red carpet, their cameras flashing like lightning. The air smelled of expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and ambition. Marcus adjusted his bow tie in the rearview mirror for the 7th time, his confidence swelling with each passing moment. He looked good. He knew he looked good. The tuxedo fit perfectly, his hair was styled just right, his watch cost more than some people's cars. He was ready. "Remember," he said to Elena without looking at her, his eyes fixed on his own reflection. "Smile. Be polite. Don't draw attention. And for God's sake, don't mention anything about your volunteer work or whatever it is you do. These people don't care about small-scale charity projects." Elena nodded silently. "Of course." He finally glanced at her. She wore the beige dress, as instructed, a simple, elegant piece that could have been worn to 100 different events without standing out. Her hair was styled simply, pulled back in a classic chignon. Her jewelry was understated, small pearl earrings, her wedding ring, nothing more. She looked elegant in a way that couldn't be bought, only inherited or cultivated through genuine grace. For a moment, Marcus felt a flicker of something, pride, maybe a regret, or some confused mixture of both. She was beautiful. She was always beautiful. But he quickly buried that feeling beneath layers of strategic thinking. "Let's go," he said, opening his door. Inside, the Bellamy estate was breathtaking in a way that made even Marcus, who owned a mansion, feel small. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, each one probably worth more than his first startup's valuation. A live orchestra played Vivaldi with perfect precision. Waiters in black tie glided between guests carrying silver trays of champagne and canapes that looked more like art than food. The walls were lined with original paintings, Monets, Rembrandts, Picassos, displayed as casually as someone might hang family photos. This was a different world. This was the world Marcus desperately wanted to belong to. He blended in immediately, or at least he thought he did. His laughter rang out loud and confident as he greeted other billionaires, inserting himself into conversations with practiced ease. He name-dropped his recent Forbes feature. He mentioned his latest funding round. He laughed a little too loudly at jokes that weren't particularly funny. When Theodore Whitmore, an oil magnate worth an estimated $8 billion, asked who the lovely woman beside him was, Marcus chuckled and said with rehearsed casualness, "Oh, Elena? She keeps my household running smoothly. You know how chaotic a 20,000 square foot mansion can be. Good management is everything." The man laughed politely, his eyes flicking to Elena with a mixture of pity and curiosity. "Is that so?" Elena's smile stayed fixed, practiced, perfect, but something inside her cracked. A small fracture that would soon become a canyon. She excused herself politely. "If you'll excuse me, I'll just get some air." Marcus barely noticed her leave. He was already pivoting to another conversation, another opportunity to impress. Elena walked toward the terrace, her heels clicking softly against marble floors. The night air was cool against her skin, a relief from the suffocating atmosphere inside. She stood at the stone railing, looking out at the glittering city below, and took a slow, deep breath, centering herself the way she'd learned to do during difficult negotiations. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" a voice said from behind her. Elena turned. A woman in a stunning emerald gown stood nearby, holding a glass of champagne. She had kind eyes, silver hair styled elegantly, and a relaxed posture of someone who'd never had to prove herself to anyone. She looked to be in her early 60s, with the kind of confidence that comes from decades of actual accomplishment. "It is," Elena replied softly. I'm Victoria Ashford, the woman said, extending her hand. My family has known the Bellamys for generations. I've been coming to this estate since I was a little girl. Elena Thornhill. They shook hands, and Victoria studied her for a moment with sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing. You look familiar, Victoria said thoughtfully. Have we met before? Perhaps at Columbia? Or maybe Cambridge? Elena smiled faintly, intrigued that this woman had guessed she'd attended prestigious universities. Perhaps in another life. Victoria laughed warmly, a genuine sound. I like that answer. Mysterious and kind. So, how do you know the Sterling crowd? Are you in finance? Technology? Elena hesitated, then said carefully, I'm here with my husband, Marcus Thornhill. Ah, yes, Victoria said, her tone neutral. The AI entrepreneur. Quite vocal tonight. I heard him speaking earlier. There was something in her tone that suggested she'd heard more than just Marcus speaking. She'd heard him introducing Elena as household staff. What do you do, Elena? Victoria asked directly. Elena's eyes flickered with something. Consideration, calculation, truth. I'm involved in economic policy research, international development, microfinance structures, and sustainable poverty reduction initiatives. Victoria's eyebrows rose with genuine interest. Really? That's fascinating. Are you published? Elena nodded. A few papers. Nothing major. Mostly in academic journals. Some policy briefs for international organizations. Victoria tilted her head, her interest clearly piqued. Modest and brilliant. That's a rare combination these days. Everyone wants credit before they've earned it. May I ask where you studied? Cambridge for my master's, Elena said. Then some postgraduate work at the London School of Economics. Victoria's expression shifted to something like respect, mixed with confusion. And your husband introduced you as household management. Elena's smile didn't waver, but her eyes revealed everything. My husband is focused on making the right impression tonight. I understand his position. Victoria studied her for a long moment. My dear, anyone who needs to diminish you to elevate themselves doesn't understand the first thing about actual power. Meanwhile, inside, Marcus was in his element, or so he thought. He'd cornered a prominent hedge fund manager named Grayson Pierce, pitching his latest AI venture with practiced precision and carefully modulated enthusiasm. The algorithm predicts market shifts 72 hours in advance with 94% accuracy, Marcus boasted, leaning inconspiratorially. We're talking about revolutionizing portfolio management. Early investors are looking at returns that will make cryptocurrency look like pocket change. Grayson raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. Impressive claims. Though I heard Chairman Aldridge has significant concerns about ethical AI applications, particularly those that could destabilize markets. He's very particular about technology that prioritizes profit over systemic stability. Marcus waved it off with false confidence. Aldridge is old school. He'll come around once he sees the numbers. Once he sees the ROI. These older generation types always resist innovation until it's too late to ignore. Grayson's expression cooled noticeably, his eyes hardening. Careful, Thornhill. Aldridge isn't someone you dismiss lightly. He's forgotten more about sustainable wealth than most of us will ever know. Marcus forced a laugh, realizing his mistake. Of course, I meant no disrespect. I simply meant he comes from a different era of thinking. Grayson's smile was thin. Wisdom isn't generational. It's earned. He excused himself, leaving Marcus feeling suddenly unsteady. Across the room, Marcus spotted Elena talking animatedly with Victoria on the terrace. For some reason, seeing her engaged in what appeared to be genuine conversation irritated him. She was supposed to be staying quiet, blending in, being invisible. Instead, she looked comfortable, engaged like she belonged. He walked over, placing a hand on Elena's shoulder with casual ownership. Darling, he said smoothly, his voice carrying false affection. Can you give me another drink? Scotch neat. Top shelf. Elena's smile faded slightly, her eyes cooling. But she nodded. Of course. Victoria watched the exchange, her expression shifting from warm to curious to quietly disgusted. As Elena walked away, Marcus turned to Victoria with a charming grin, completely oblivious to her disapproval. "She's helpful, isn't she?" he said, as if Elena were a useful appliance. Victoria's tone was measured, careful. "She seems remarkable." Marcus chuckled, missing the edge in her voice. "She manages things well. Keeps everything organized. I'd be lost without good support staff, you know." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. She simply filed this interaction away, the way powerful people do when they witness something distasteful. When Elena returned with the drink, she handed it to Marcus without a word. Victoria caught her eye and gave her a small, understanding nod, a gesture of solidarity between women who recognized exactly what was happening. "This is getting intense, right? Stay with me, because what's about to happen will shake everything." If you're feeling this story, subscribe so you never miss these powerful lessons. Drop a comment telling me what you think Marcus should do right now. Later, during dinner, the guests were seated at long tables draped in white French linen, with centerpieces of white roses and candles. The aroma of roasted duck with cherry reduction, truffle risotto, and aged wine filled the air. The dinner service was impeccable. Courses timed perfectly, wine poured at exactly the right moment, every detail orchestrated like a symphony. Marcus laughed too loudly at every joke, his desperation to belong barely concealed beneath his expensive cologne and perfect smile. His voice grew louder as the night wore on, as if volume could compensate for legitimacy. He dominated conversations, interrupted others, name-dropped relentlessly. Elena sat beside him, silent, observing. She noticed how the old money families moved, effortlessly, without needing to prove anything. They spoke quietly because they didn't need volume to be heard. They listened more than they spoke because they already knew their value. She noticed how Marcus's voice grew louder as the night wore on, how his jokes became more aggressive, how his need for validation radiated off him like heat. She also noticed how several guests kept glancing at her with curiosity, how Victoria had clearly been speaking with others about her, how whispers seemed to follow her even though Marcus had tried to make her invisible. Then, midway through the main course, the lights dimmed dramatically. A spotlight illuminated the stage at the front of the ballroom. Chairman Aldridge, Harold Aldridge, the man whose name appeared on buildings and endowments, whose family had shaped American industry for 5 generations, took the stage. He was in his 70s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a classic black tuxedo that looked decades old because quality never goes out of style. He had the kind of authority that didn't need announcement, the kind of presence that made everyone sit up straighter. The room fell completely silent. Even the waiters stopped moving. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aldridge began, his voice deep and commanding, filling every corner of the vast ballroom. "Thank you for joining us tonight. Sterling Global was founded 50 years ago by my father on a simple principle. True leadership isn't about wealth, it's about wisdom." The crowd murmured in agreement, glasses clinking softly. Aldridge continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "This summit exists to identify not just the richest, but the most responsible. Those who understand that power without integrity is merely tyranny in a suit. Those who recognize that wealth is a tool, not a trophy." Marcus clapped enthusiastically, nodding as if every word affirmed his own philosophy, as if Aldridge were speaking directly to him in approval. Aldridge's expression grew more serious. Tonight's keynote will be delivered by someone who embodies these values. Someone whose work in international economic justice has shaped policy in 14 countries. Someone who has advised governments, trained thousands of entrepreneurs, and fundamentally changed how we think about sustainable development. Someone who understands that true wealth is measured in lives improved, not portfolios expanded. Marcus leaned forward eagerly, assuming it would be some famous economist or perhaps a former Secretary of State. He prepared his most impressed expression. Aldridge smiled, and there was something almost mischievous in it. Please welcome tonight's host and keynote speaker, Dr. Elena Maria Thornhill. The room froze. Time seemed to stop. Marcus's hands stopped mid-clap, suspended in air. His champagne glass slipped slightly in his other hand, spilling droplets onto the pristine white tablecloth. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Elena rose gracefully from her seat beside him. The beige dress that Marcus had chosen specifically to make her forgettable now seemed luminous under the stage lights, elegant in its simplicity. She walked toward the podium with calm, measured steps, the walk of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Every eye in the room followed her. Every single eye. Whispers erupted like wildfire. That's his wife. He said she was his housekeeper. Did you hear him earlier? He called her household staff. She has a doctorate? Wait, isn't she the Elena Thornhill who wrote that paper on microfinance reform that the UN cited? Marcus sat paralyzed, his face drained of all color. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The world tilted on its axis. On stage, Elena took the microphone with practiced ease. Her voice was steady, clear, and filled the room effortlessly. She didn't need to shout. She commanded attention simply by speaking. "Thank you, Chairman Aldridge," she began, her slight smile warm but professional. "It's an honor to stand before you tonight." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled crowd. Billionaires, CEOs, old money, new money, the architects of the global economy. Her eyes passed over Marcus, but didn't linger, didn't accuse, didn't acknowledge. "Many of you don't know me," she continued. "Some of you met me earlier tonight and were kind enough to engage with my ideas rather than my last name. For that, I'm deeply grateful." Victoria smiled from her table, nodding in acknowledgement. "I've spent the last decade working quietly," Elena said, "behind the scenes, advising governments on microfinance reform in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, consulting with NGOs on sustainable development initiatives, writing policy papers that, admittedly, very few people read outside of academic and policy circles." Soft, knowing laughter rippled through the audience. These people recognized genuine humility when they heard it, the real kind, not the false modesty that's really a humble brag. Elena's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "I've learned that true influence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need a spotlight or a press release. It works in the margins, in the overlooked spaces, with the people society forgets. With the single mother trying to start a business. With the farmer who needs a loan no bank will give. With communities rebuilding after disaster." The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "And I've learned something else," Elena continued, her voice taking on a quiet intensity. "I've learned that respect, real respect, isn't something you demand or purchase or perform your way into. It's something you earn by treating others with dignity, regardless of their title, their bank account, or their zip code." The applause began slowly, then built like a wave, growing stronger and stronger until it thundered through the ballroom. People stood, one by one, then in groups, the entire room rose to its feet. Marcus sat motionless, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. His throat was dry. His mind spun. Faces turned toward him, not with admiration, but with judgment, with disappointment, with that particular kind of disdain reserved for those who reveal themselves as small. Victoria, seated nearby, leaned toward him just enough for him to hear. "Remarkable wife you have, Mr. Thornhill." Marcus couldn't speak. Words had abandoned him completely. Elena's speech continued for another 10 minutes, but they felt like both an eternity and an instant. She spoke about economic justice, about the moral responsibility of wealth, about how systems of power perpetuate inequality when leaders prioritize image over impact. She spoke about her work with microfinance institutions, about teaching communities to build sustainable economies, about the dignity of work and opportunity. She shared a story about a woman in Kenya who'd used a $200 loan to start a small grocery stand that now employed 5 people and supported 3 families. "That woman taught me more about wealth creation than any business school ever could," Elena said, "because she understood that money is a tool for community building, not just personal accumulation." Every word was a revelation. Every sentence peeled back another layer of the woman Marcus thought he knew, but had never bothered to truly see. When she finished, the applause was deafening. Chairman Aldridge joined her on stage, pride evident in his expression, his arm around her shoulders in a paternal gesture. He leaned toward the microphone. Elena has been my personal advisor on Sterling Global's philanthropic initiatives for the past 3 years, Aldridge announced. Her insights have been invaluable. She's helped us direct over $800 million towards sustainable development programs that are actually working, actually changing lives, not just making us feel good about ourselves. 3 years. Marcus's mind reeled. 3 years she'd been working with the most powerful economic figure in the country, and he'd never once asked what she did during her days. Never once thought to wonder. Never once considered that her quiet hours in the library might be anything more than reading for pleasure. Aldridge continued, his voice carrying weight. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce a new partnership. Sterling Global and the Thornhill Foundation will jointly fund a $500 million initiative for global microfinance education, focusing on training programs for women entrepreneurs in developing economies. Marcus's head snapped up so fast his neck cracked. Thornhill Foundation? His foundation? He didn't have a foundation. What was happening? Elena spoke again, her tone calm, factual, betraying nothing. The Thornhill Foundation was established 2 years ago, funded by my inheritance and personal earnings from consulting work. It operates independently, focused exclusively on sustainable economic development and educational access. She paused, and for the first time, she looked directly at Marcus. Not with anger, not with triumph, just with quiet, devastating truth. I believe that wealth carries responsibility, she said, her eyes locked on his. And that responsibility begins at home. It begins with how we treat the people closest to us, how we speak to them, how we see them. Because if we can't extend dignity to those we claim to love, we have no business claiming we care about justice for strangers. The room erupted in applause again, but this time it felt different. It felt like judgment disguised as celebration. Marcus felt every eye in the room turned toward him, not with admiration for being her husband, with judgment for being exposed, with that particular kind of social death that happens when someone reveals themselves in the worst possible way. Can you believe this? Marcus's whole world just shattered. But this story isn't over yet. If this is gripping you, smash that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below. Was Elena right to expose him publicly, or should she have handled it differently? After the speech, the atmosphere shifted entirely. The crowd swarmed Elena like she was the event's true star, because she was. Billionaires who'd ignored her earlier now competed desperately for her attention, for a moment of her time, for any acknowledgement. Dr. Thornhill, I'd love to discuss your work in sub-Saharan Africa. We've been looking for authentic partners. Your paper on microfinance structures was absolutely brilliant. Change how our foundation approaches grants. How did you manage to stay so humble while doing such important work? Would you consider consulting for our organization? Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, invisible for perhaps the first time in his adult life. He watched as Elena moved through conversations with grace, answering questions thoughtfully, connecting people with similar interests, being genuinely interested in others rather than interesting to others. Grayson, the hedge fund manager he'd tried to impress earlier, approached him with a dry, knowing smile. Your wife is quite impressive, Thornhill. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat clicking. Ah, yes, she is. Grayson leaned closer, his voice low enough that only Marcus could hear. Word of advice, since you're new to this world. Humility isn't weakness. It's strength. Arrogance, on the other hand, is just insecurity with a microphone. These people can smell it instantly. They were laughing at you earlier, not with you. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Grayson walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Marcus standing alone in his expensive tuxedo, surrounded by hundreds of people but utterly isolated. Victoria appeared beside him, her earlier warmth completely replaced with cool disappointment. You introduced her as your housekeeper, she said plainly. not as a question, but as a statement of fact that couldn't be disputed. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came. What could he possibly say? Victoria shook her head slowly. Dignity isn't about status, Mr. Thornhill. It's about how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. The fact that you believed no one important was watching when you humiliated your wife tells me everything I need to know about your character. She walked away, and Marcus felt something break inside him. Not his pride, that had already shattered. Something deeper. The image he'd built of himself crumbled like wet sand. He looked across the room at Elena, who was now in deep conversation with Chairman Aldridge and several others. Her face animated, her hands gesturing as she explained something complex, her intelligence and passion fully visible. She looked like she'd always belonged in rooms like this. Because she had. He'd just been too blind to see it. For the first time that night, Marcus understood what it felt like to be made small, to be rendered invisible, to be judged and found wanting. And the worst part was knowing he'd done this to himself. He'd done it to Elena first, and in doing so, he'd done it to himself. Hours later, Marcus sat in the back of their town car, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past like tears. Elena sat beside him, silent, her hands folded in her lap, her wedding ring catching occasional light. The driver didn't speak, sensing the tension. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the distant rain that had finally begun to fall, as if the sky itself was crying. Marcus's voice came out hoarse, damaged. "Why didn't you tell me?" Elena turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Tell you what, that you were working with Aldridge, that you had a foundation, that you were this person, this important person." Elena's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Would you have listened?" Marcus flinched. "I would have." "You didn't ask, Marcus," Elena interrupted quietly. "In 5 years of marriage, you never once asked what I did with my time beyond managing household affairs. You never asked about my education, my work, my interests, my dreams. You assumed that because I wasn't chasing headlines or building a public brand, I wasn't doing anything meaningful." Marcus's throat tightened painfully. "I thought you were happy, managing the house, supporting me, being my partner." Elena's voice was soft but firm, each word carefully chosen. "I was supporting you, but you stopped seeing me as a partner. You started seeing me as staff, as an accessory, as someone whose value was determined by how well I complemented your image." "That's not fair," Marcus whispered, though even he didn't believe it. "Isn't it?" Elena replied, finally turning to look at him fully. "You told people I was your housekeeper, Marcus. You told me to dress forgettably. You treated my presence like a liability rather than an asset. You silenced me because you were afraid my voice would somehow diminish yours." Marcus's eyes filled with tears he'd been fighting all night. "I was under pressure. I wanted to impress them. I needed them to see me as one of them." Elena looked out the window at the rain, now streaming down the glass. "You were more concerned with impressing strangers than respecting your wife. You valued their approval more than my dignity." The car pulled into the circular driveway of their mansion. The rain was heavier now, drumming against the roof like accusations. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Marcus turned to her, desperation creeping into his voice, making him sound young and frightened. "I love you, Elena." She met his gaze, and he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not hatred, not even anger, but something worse, disappointment mixed with clarity. "Love without respect is just possession, Marcus. It's ownership. It's keeping someone around because they serve a purpose for you, not because you value who they are." He flinched as if she'd struck him physically. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to humiliate me," Elena finished for him. "But you did. Easily. Naturally. Like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. That's the part that hurts most. Not that you made a mistake, but that diminishing me felt like common sense to you." Elena opened the car door, and Marcus watched as rain immediately soaked her dress, her hair, washing away the careful styling, revealing her as she was strong, beautiful, hurt, but unbroken. Marcus fumbled with his own door, splashing through puddles in his expensive shoes. "Elena, please. I'll fix this." She stopped at the front door, rain streaming down her face, mingling with tears she wasn't trying to hide anymore. You can't fix this with words, Marcus. You built a fortune by calculating risk and reward, by strategizing outcomes, by gaming systems. But you forgot that some things can't be bought or strategized. Trust, dignity, partnership, love. I know, Marcus said, his voice breaking completely, his own tears mixing with rain. I know I failed you. I failed us. Elena's expression softened, but only slightly. Then prove you know. Not with grand gestures or public apologies. Not with jewelry or vacations or promises. With quiet, consistent change. With daily choice to see me. Really see me. Marcus nodded frantically, desperately. I will. I promise. I'll do anything. Elena studied him for a long moment. Rain pouring down, thunder rolling overhead like divine judgment. I'm not leaving you, Marcus. But I'm not staying in a marriage where I have to shrink myself so you can feel bigger. I'm not going to be your supporting character anymore. Either we're partners, real partners, or we're nothing. She walked inside, leaving Marcus standing in the rain, soaked and shaking. For the first time in his life, he realized that all his billions couldn't buy back a single moment of dignity he'd stolen from the woman he loved. He stood there for a long time, letting the rain punish him, feeling the cold seep into his bones, understanding finally that the real bankruptcy wasn't financial, it was moral. The days that followed were the hardest of Marcus's life, not because of business failures or financial losses, but because he had to sit with the reality of who he'd become. He had to face the man in the mirror without the armor of accomplishment or the shield of wealth. Elena moved into the guest wing of the mansion, a suite of rooms that might as well have been on another continent for how distant she felt. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't cold. She was simply protecting herself, creating boundaries that Marcus had never respected before. Marcus tried to talk to her multiple times, approaching her like a supplicant approaching a throne, but she set clear boundaries. I'm not ready for long conversations. Marcus, I need space to think, to feel, to figure out what I want. So Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He stopped networking, stopped chasing deals, stopped performing. He called his assistant, a competent woman named Jennifer who'd worked for him for 6 years, and cleared his schedule completely. Cancel everything, he said. Sir, you have the Tokyo investor meeting on Tuesday. That's been scheduled for 4 months. Cancel it. The Forbes interview. Cancel it. The board meeting. Reschedule it. Cancel everything for the next month. Clear it all. Jennifer was silent for a moment, then said carefully, Is everything all right, Mr. Thornhill? Marcus looked at his empty penthouse office, at the awards on the walls, at the magazine covers with his face on them, at all the symbols of success that suddenly felt hollow. No, he said honestly, but I'm trying to fix that. He hired a therapist, not a celebrity life coach or a corporate consultant who'd tell him what he wanted to hear. A real therapist who specialized in narcissism and relational trauma. Dr. Patel was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, kind eyes, and absolutely no patience for excuses or deflection. Why are you here? She asked during their first session, sitting across from him in a simple office with comfortable chairs and plants. Marcus fumbled with his words. Because my wife is upset with me. Why is she upset? Because I embarrassed her. Publicly. At a very important event. Dr. Patel leaned forward slightly. Mr. Thornhill, let's start with honesty. Why are you really here? Marcus's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Because I'm terrified of losing her. Why? Because she's the only person who ever saw me as more than a bank account. More than a success story. More than a net worth. Dr. Patel nodded slowly. And yet you reduced her to less than a person. Why? Marcus's hands trembled in his lap. Because I was afraid. Of what? Of not being enough. The words escaped before he could stop them, raw and true. Of them seeing through me and realizing I don't belong. Dr. Patel's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. Tell me about your father. Marcus closed his eyes. His father, Thomas Thornhill, had been a factory foreman. Hardworking, proud, bitter. A man who'd spent his entire life watching rich men buy things he'd never afford, drive cars he'd never sit in, live lives he'd never touch. A man who'd come home angry more nights than not, who'd kicked at furniture and blamed the world, who'd told a young Marcus again and again, "If you don't become somebody, you'll die nobody. Don't end up like me." Marcus had built his entire identity around becoming somebody, around being seen, around matching. But in the process, he'd forgotten how to be anyone. He'd become a performance of success rather than an actual person. We're at the turning point. Can Marcus really change, or is it too late? If you're invested in this story, make sure you're subscribed because the conclusion is going to challenge everything you think about redemption. Comment below. Can someone this self-centered truly transform? At home, Marcus began to notice things he'd been blind to for years. The way Elena moved through the mansion like a ghost, present but not really there. The way she read alone in the library for hours. The way she answered phone calls in a different room, her voice animated and warm, with everyone but him. One evening, Marcus found her on the terrace, looking out at the city as the sun set in shades of orange and purple. He approached carefully, as if she might flee. "Can I sit?" he asked softly. Elena glanced at him, surprised by the tentative tone, then nodded. "All right." They sat in silence for a while. The city hummed below them. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Life continued, indifferent to their crisis. Finally, Marcus spoke. "I've been seeing a therapist. Dr. Patel. She's not easy on me." Elena's expression didn't change. "Good. She asked me why I needed to make you small," Marcus continued, his voice rough with emotion. "And I realized I've spent my whole life terrified of being invisible. My father died, believing he was nobody. He worked himself to death for a company that replaced him within a week. At his funeral, 12 people came. 12. And I swore I'd never be like him." Elena listened without interrupting, her face neutral. But somewhere along the way, Marcus said, staring at his hands, "I stopped measuring my worth by who I was and started measuring it by who was watching. And when you didn't need the spotlight, when you didn't perform or peacock or advertise your value, I thought that meant you didn't have any." Elena's eyes glistened, but she stayed quiet. Marcus turned to her, his voice breaking. "You were always the smartest person in every room, the kindest, the most capable. And instead of celebrating that, I resented it. Because it reminded me that I'm not actually special. I'm not actually remarkable. I'm just loud." Elena's voice was soft when she finally spoke. "You are special, Marcus. But not because of your money or your magazine covers or your net worth. You're special because you're capable of growth, of change, of becoming better than you were. If you choose it." Marcus's throat tightened with unshed tears. "I don't know how to be the man you deserve." Elena finally looked at him fully, really looked at him. "Start by being the man you'd respect. The man you'd want your future children to become. The man you wish your father had been." They sat together as the sun disappeared completely, leaving them in twilight. Not as husband and wife, but as two people trying to find their way back to truth. Weeks turned into months. Marcus didn't rush Elena. He didn't beg or make grand romantic gestures that were really about improving something. He simply worked on himself, day by day, choice by choice. He started volunteering at a nonprofit Elena had supported for years, one that provided business training and microloans to low-income entrepreneurs. No press, no photo ops, no announcements on social media, just showing up. At first, the people there didn't recognize him. When they did, they treated him with polite distance, uncertain of his motives. Marcus didn't blame them. He'd spent years being the kind of billionaire they had every reason to distrust. He scrubbed floors. He filed paperwork. He listened to stories of struggle without offering unsolicited advice or try to fix things. He learned people's names. He showed up consistently, week after week, even when no one thanked him. One day, a single mother named Carmen who was taking business classes approached him. "Why are you really here?" she asked bluntly, arms crossed. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I need to remember what work actually means. What real value looks like." Carmen studied him suspiciously. "You're that billionaire, right? The one whose wife runs the Thornhill Foundation?" Marcus nodded. "Yes." Carmen's expression was unreadable. She helped my sister start her business. Gave her a microloan when every bank said no. Believed in her when nobody else would. Now my sister employs 4 people. Supports 2 families. Marcus's chest tightened. I didn't know that specific story. That's the difference between you two, Carmen said, not unkindly but truthfully. She doesn't need people to know. She just does the work. At home, Marcus stopped trying to control conversations or dominate space. When Elena shared updates about her work, he listened. Really listened. He asked questions, not to impress her, but to understand. You mentioned the Nigeria project, he said one evening over a quiet dinner. How's the infrastructure challenge coming along? Last time you mentioned it, the government delays were causing problems. Elena looked up, genuinely surprised. You remembered that? Of course. She studied him for a moment, searching for performance or manipulation. Finding none, she shared more about the negotiations, the cultural considerations, the partnerships they were building. Slowly, carefully, the walls between them began to lower. Not disappear, just lower enough to see through. One night, Marcus found Elena working late in the library, papers spread around her, laptop screen glowing. He knocked gently on the doorframe. Can I bring you tea? He asked. She smiled faintly, surprised by the simple gesture. That would be nice. He returned with tea prepared exactly how she liked it, a detail he'd never bothered to remember before. He set it down gently and turned to leave. You can stay, Elena said, if you want. Marcus sat across from her, not hovering, just present. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Elena finally closed her laptop. Marcus, I need to tell you something. His heart raced, fearing the worst. Okay, I'm not ready to go back to how things were, she said carefully. I don't think I ever want to go back to that. Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. I understand. But, Elena continued, I'm willing to try something new, something different, something neither of us has experienced yet. What does that look like? Marcus asked, barely daring to hope. Elena's voice was steady, clear. It looks like partnership, real partnership, where we're both seen, both valued, both respected equally, where your career doesn't overshadow my work, where my intelligence doesn't threaten your ego, where we build something together instead of you, where your career doesn't overshadow my work, where my intelligence doesn't threaten your ego, where we build something together instead of you building something and me existing beside it. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. Yes, he said immediately. I want that. I want all of that. Elena continued, and it means you stop performing. Stop trying to prove you're worthy. You just are. You exist as yourself, flaws and all, without the armor of wealth or status. I'm still learning how, Marcus admitted, his voice raw. I don't know who I am without the performance. I know, Elena said gently, but you're trying. That matters more than you realize. She reached across the table and took his hand, the first time she'd initiated physical contact in months. Marcus held it like it was made of glass, precious and fragile. We start over, Elena said, not as who we were, as who we're becoming. Marcus nodded, unable to speak through the emotion choking his throat. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. Marcus and Elena began dating again, not as the people they'd been when they met, but as new versions of themselves. They had coffee dates where Marcus asked questions and listened to answers. They took walks where silence was comfortable, not suffocating. They worked together on Thornhill Foundation projects, Marcus using his business acumen to support Elena's vision rather than override it. Marcus learned to introduce Elena properly. This is my wife, Dr. Elena Thornhill. She runs the Thornhill Foundation and advises on international economic policy. She's the brilliant one in our family. He learned to step back when she spoke, to amplify her voice rather than compete with it. He learned that her success didn't diminish him. It enhanced them both. One evening, 6 months after the disastrous Gala, they received another invitation. Sterling Global Summit, annual gathering. But this time, the invitation was addressed differently. Dr. Elena Thornhill and Mr. Marcus Thornhill. Elena showed him the invitation, watching his reaction carefully. Marcus looked at it for a long moment, then smiled, a real smile, not performed. Will you come with me? He asked. As my partner? Not my accessory, not my plus one. As my equal. Elena studied his face, searching for any hint of the old Marcus, the one who needed her to be small. Finding none, she nodded. Yes, but as myself. Fully myself. I wouldn't want it any other way, Marcus said, and meant it. On the night of the summit, Marcus wore a simple black tuxedo. Elena wore a stunning midnight blue gown that commanded attention. Not because Marcus told her to, but because she chose to. She looked radiant, powerful herself. When they arrived, photographers called out to her first. Dr. Thornhill, can we get a photo? Marcus stepped back instinctively, giving her space. Elena smiled and gestured to him. Together, she said firmly. They stood side by side, equal. Inside, the evening unfolded differently than before. When someone asked Marcus about his latest venture, he spoke briefly, then said, "But you should really ask my wife about the Thornhill Foundation's new education initiative. We're launching a program that trains women entrepreneurs in 12 countries." Elena designed the entire curriculum. It's groundbreaking. Elena's eyes widened slightly, then softened with something like pride, not in the program, but in him. Later, Chairman Aldridge approached them both. "Marcus," he said, his tone measured, "I hear you've been volunteering at the East Side Opportunity Center." Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. For the past 6 months." Aldridge's expression shifted, not to warmth, but to respect earned. "Good. Wealth without service is just hoarding. I'm glad you're learning that." He turned to Elena. "And you, my dear, continue to impress. The Nigeria project is exceeding all projections." Elena smiled. "We have an excellent team, and Marcus has been invaluable in helping us navigate some of the business infrastructure challenges." Aldridge raised an eyebrow, glancing at Marcus. "Is that so?" Marcus spoke carefully. "I'm learning that supporting something bigger than myself is more fulfilling than building monuments to my ego." Aldridge studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Perhaps there's hope for you yet, Thornhill." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. But it was a door cracked open. When they left that night, Marcus opened the car door for Elena, not as a performance, but as a gesture of respect. As they drove home, she reached over and took his hand. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. Marcus squeezed her hand, tears in his eyes. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on us." Elena's voice was soft but firm. "I didn't do it for you, Marcus. I did it for me, because I refused to let anyone, even you, make me forget my worth. But I'm glad you're becoming someone worthy of partnership." Marcus looked at her in the dim light of the car. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you." Elena shook her head. "No, you'll spend the rest of your life being a partner. Not proving, not performing. Just being present, respectful, and real." Marcus nodded, understanding finally settling into his bones. "Just being real." "Yes," Elena said. "That's all I ever wanted." 1 year after the gala that changed everything, Marcus stood on a stage at a business conference. But this time, he wasn't the keynote speaker. Elena was. He sat in the front row, watching his wife command the room with her intelligence, her passion, her vision. When she finished to thunderous applause, she gestured to him. "I want to thank my husband, Marcus, who has become the kind of partner I always hoped for, but had to wait for him to choose to be. Thank you for learning to see me." The audience applauded, but Marcus barely heard it. He was focused on Elena's face, on the pride in her eyes, on the genuine smile that said, "We made it." After the conference, as they walked to their car hand in hand, Marcus said, "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I have less now than I did a year ago. Fewer deals, smaller portfolio, lower profile." Elena looked concerned. "Does that bother you?" Marcus smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "No, because I have more of what actually matters. You, us, purpose, peace. I traded wealth for richness, and I got the better deal." Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. "Marcus Thornhill, I think you might finally be growing up." He laughed, pulling her close. "Better late than never." She rested her head against his chest. "Better late than never." They stood there in the parking garage, Two people who'd almost lost each other, holding on to what they'd fought to rebuild. Not a perfect marriage, not a fairy tale, but something real, something earned, something built on the foundation of mutual respect. Marcus whispered into her hair, "Thank you for teaching me that true wealth isn't in my bank account. It's in how I treat the person who trusts me with their heart." Elena looked up at him. "You're learning. Keep learning. Every day," Marcus promised. Every single day. And he meant it. Because he learned the hardest lesson wealth can teach. That you can have everything and still have nothing if you don't have respect. That you can be famous and still be nobody if you make others feel like nothing. That true success isn't measured in dollars or deals, but in dignity extended and dignity received. Marcus Thornhill had been a billionaire who introduced his wife as his maid at a gala. Now he was a man who introduced himself as the husband of Dr. Elena Thornhill. And that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, then listen closely. This isn't just about Marcus and Elena. This is about every relationship where one person makes themselves big by making someone else small. This is about every time we've chosen image over integrity. Every time we valued strangers' opinions more than our partner's dignity. I want you to think about someone in your life right now. Someone you might be taking for granted. Someone whose voice you might be silencing because it's easier than sharing the stage. Someone you love but don't respect the way they deserve. Today is the day you change that. Hit that like button if this story challenged you to be better. Subscribe so you never miss these powerful lessons about love, respect, and what really matters in life. Drop a comment right now telling me, what's one thing you're going to do differently in your relationships after watching this story? Be honest. Be real. Let's create a community that values dignity over status. And here's the truth that might be hard to hear. If Marcus's behavior looked familiar, if you recognize yourself in his actions, that's not a reason to feel ashamed. That's a reason to choose growth. Because the most powerful moment in any person's life is when they stop defending who they were and start becoming who they should be. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Maybe it's someone who's being treated like Elena was. Maybe it's someone who's acting like Marcus did. Either way, this story could change a life. It could save a relationship. It could wake someone up before it's too late. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community that believes people can change, that love can heal, that respect is non-negotiable. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll explore more stories that challenge us to live with integrity, love with respect, and lead with humility. Don't forget, subscribe, like, and share. Your engagement helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Until next time, remember, wealth is what you have, but richness is who you are. Choose richness. Choose respect. Choose love that lifts people up instead of cutting them down. See you next time.